Good evening, it's Monday and you're watching The Big Story with Dylan Ang. I'm Olivia Quay coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom.
Now across the causeway is Muhyiddin Yassin's first day as Malaysia's new Prime Minister after he was sworn in yesterday morning.
The move by the King caught most by surprise, especially with Mr. Yassin's former allies in the Pakatan Harapan coalition saying that he did not have the majority in Parliament.
Now here's a recap of the surprise turn of events that led to the appointment of Malaysia's 8th Prime Minister. On the afternoon of February 29th, the King identified Muhyiddin Yassin as the next Prime Minister on the grounds that he possibly had the majority parliamentary support. After nightfall, Anwar Ibrahim said that Pakatan Harapan had the majority in Parliament, with 114 lawmakers backing Mahathir Mohamad as their candidate. Dr. Mahathir then said that he had planned to inform the King of the support he had garnered. However, in a twist of events yesterday, Dr. Mahathir said that the King would no longer see him. He accused Mr. Muhyiddin of plotting to take the premiership, going on to question if the government involving former ruling party UMNO will be ready to pursue pending cases against its politicians. Nonetheless, Mr. Muhyiddin was sworn in as Malaysia's 8th Prime Minister at about 10:30 a.m. Sunday morning. Joining us now from Kuala Lumpur is Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh. Shannon, nice to speak with you again. Now, a lot has happened over the weekend. How has the public reacted to Mr. Muhyiddin's appointment?
Well, I think it depends on which side of the political divide you're standing on. Those who have been supportive of Pakatan Harapan obviously feel that they have been betrayed. Muhyiddin being one of the Pakatan Harapan leaders that was elected into government in 2018. But if you are with what was previously the opposition and people who are in government now, of course, they are feeling that this is a great time to be alive. There's been a kind of a racial lens to it. Even if you are not an UMNO supporter or PAS supporter, the Malay parties that are now in government, there have been many people who have been questioning the kind of influence that DAP has had in government. And DAP is largely a Chinese party, and their leader Guan Eng is finance minister. So they've been questioning appointments like that, and they believe that with Muhyiddin in power now, with his coalition made up largely of Malay leaders, that the situation will be rebalanced.
Right. Well, Shannon, tell us more about the new Malaysian PM and his career highlights. Mr. Muhyiddin was appointed by the King, but does he really have the support of Parliament?
Muhyiddin, well, he rose through the ranks in the 70s and 80s very quickly through UMNO Johor and became the chief minister in the state in 1986 all the way to 1995. And then he was promoted to becoming a federal minister. And he was rising through the ranks very quickly, and he became Deputy Prime Minister in 2009 to Najib Razak. Now, we know that Najib Razak was and is embroiled in the 1MDB scandal. And that led Muhyiddin and Mahathir to team up, really, to kind of battle against Najib. Now, they've not the first time that they've teamed up. In 2009, when Muhyiddin became Deputy Prime Minister, it was also because Mahathir and Muhyiddin were both criticizing the then Prime Minister, Abdullah Badawi. Right. This was 1 year after UMNO had lost its 2/3 majority in Parliament at the 2008 election. This is actually the first time that Mahathir and Muhyiddin has really split and have gone their separate ways. And, we've yet to see how Muhyiddin will fare as his own man. He's his own leader now, Prime Minister. As for whether he really has a majority from the King, I think in Malaysia, when the Agong says that he believes Muhyiddin has the majority, then it's not something that you can really question. The only way to kind of test it, I think, is to go to Parliament.
Now, Shannon, I have to ask you, what will be Mr. Muhyiddin's next steps? To come up with a new mandate, or since Bersatu is no longer part of Pakatan Harapan?
Well, to come up with a new mandate, I think there's still this burning question people have been asking. What was the necessity of this 1 week crisis? There was a government in place. It had quite a stable majority at about 130 MPs. Why do we need to realign the entire government? Now, he has to explain this to the nation. The narrative that you get from people who are supportive of him is that we needed to either get rid of DAP or DAP's influence in government, so we needed to bring in other parties to kind of dilute their influence. But how do we go from there to wanting to give Mahathir more support to Muhyiddin becoming Prime Minister? Now, that's not been explained, so he's supposed to address the nation tonight at 8 p.m. and we hope those questions are answered. And of course, affirming once and for all that he has majority of parliament would be good. So we're looking forward to a parliamentary sitting as well.
Well, Shannon, what does all of this leave Dr. Mahathir? He insisted yesterday that he still has the backing of the majority of lawmakers in parliament. Can he challenge Mr. Muhyiddin's appointment?
Well, it's unprecedented, of course, to try to challenge a majority in any other way except in parliament. There have been attempts to go to the courts and see whether this sort of appointment is legal, but everything that has happened in Malaysian legal history is basically that the royal is ultimately the referee, right? And if the referee blows his whistle and say, well, it's full time and that team has won, then you have to accept the decision. Of course, governments can collapse, right? The previous government just collapsed a week ago. If Muhyiddin goes into parliament and he can't hold his majority, then he will be out of government as well. So the question is whether Mahathir's side, along with Pakatan Harapan, they claim they have up to 114 MPs. Can they hold on to this number when parliament reconvenes?
Now, Shannon, let's call up an old picture of Mr. Muhyiddin, Dr. Mahathir, Mr. Anwar, as well as former Prime Minister Najib Razak. Now, taken around 40 years ago, it illustrates the longevity of this generation of politicians. Now, should Malaysia look to a new generation of leaders? Are the people ready to move on from the old guard?
There's this joke going around about that picture. The question being asked is who wants to be Prime Minister, and everyone puts their hand up. So, 3 out of 4 of these guys have had their chance or are getting their chance right now.
Right.
Yep.
Odd man out being Anwar. I mean, I can understand him not wanting to give up. But I think there is a sense now with both Mahathir and Anwar, their coalition have been ousted. There is a sense, I think growing sense, especially among younger Malaysians, that we should move on. We should move to a new group of leaders, charismatic, younger leaders, who maybe don't come with the same baggage as these older leaders. For every one of those people up in that picture, there's a reason not to support him. Anwar has his own allegations of sexual misconduct. Ade, of course, was in power for 22 years, and many people who said that he broke down independent institutions. Najib has his own 1MDB scandal, so on and so forth. Maybe people would rather back someone who doesn't have all this sort of hindrances and obstacles, and that they can really bring the country together. Right now, Muhyiddin might be in power, but he is in power of a nation that's really divided.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, as always, Shannon. Always a pleasure. Now, of course, we've been speaking to Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh on the latest in Malaysia. Now, keep up to date with developments at straitstimes.com.
Moving on, health officials in the US have reported a second death in the country from the coronavirus. Both deaths were reported to be in the state of Washington.
Now, meanwhile, New York has also confirmed its first coronavirus case. The case involved a woman in her 30s who contracted the virus during a recent trip to Iran. She's now isolated in a home in densely populated Manhattan.
Australian health officials, meanwhile, said that a woman and a male doctor have contracted the virus, becoming the first cases of community transmissions in the country. Closer to home, 2 Indonesians have tested positive for the virus. This marks the first confirmed cases in the world's 4th most populous country. The death toll in Italy has risen to 34, with more than 1,500 confirmed cases. South Korea, meanwhile, has reported nearly 500 new cases, bringing the total number of cases to more than 4,000. The death toll stands at 22. The government of Seoul has asked for a murder investigation into leaders of Shincheonji Church, which is at the center of the outbreak. Officials are saying that the church was liable for its refusal to cooperate with efforts to stop the disease. Back home, 4 new cases were confirmed last night. 3 were linked to the new Wislan Technologies cluster. The new infections bring the total number of confirmed cases here to 106. Meanwhile, 2 more patients have been discharged, bringing the total number of fully recovered to 74. Last week, the Home Affairs Ministry said it's investigating the unregistered Singapore chapter of South Korea's Shincheonji Church. Now, I mentioned earlier that the church is at the center of the coronavirus outbreak in Daegu. The Straits Times news editor Zakir Hussain spoke to 2 ex-members from the Singapore chapter. So, Zakir, fascinating accounts from these 2 former members. What were some of the most interesting things they shared with you?
I think it was the experience of how they were targeted and recruited. You know, it started out innocuous, someone just inviting you through a friend or, as a concerned fellow Christian to kind of attend these classes, and it was only several weeks on and several months on when they became aware that, oh, this was not your usual church, not your usual Bible study group. It seemed to focus a bit more on sort of the prophecy surrounding the end times, and it sort of all builds up to when the group and its instructors reveal that this Korean man who's leader of the group, he's claimed to be, a messenger, Messiah. He's revealed to them as the leader, and by then I think folks who are already deeply involved would find it quite hard to leave as one of the former members or who took part in the services kind of experienced. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that it is quite hard to leave this church. How did you spoke to two women, right?
Yes, that's right.
I think you called them Linda and Shanice.
That's right.
Not their real names.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did these two women manage to leave the church?
I think one of them had sort of severe niggling doubts and decided to look online, and she hadn't been a full member yet, but she found out all about the group and former members describing it as a cult and its deceptive practices, and she felt something was not right. So she just texted, someone she'd been in contact with who was at the classes and said, I'm not going anymore, and that was it. Someone else, I think, left a little later. I mean, you can't just stop attending services and cut off contact, and I think that was the way they sort of stopped taking part in its activities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, MHA said investigations were already underway before the church in South Korea made headlines, amid the whole coronavirus outbreak in South Korea. So the outbreak accelerated these investigations by MHA.
Right, yeah.
But what was MHA looking into in the first place?
I think from what it said about the case, the church, or at least the group, was not upfront about its name and intentions, and it tried to register, under another name. It tried to register consultancies and so on. And it was when MHA was reviewing the registration of one of these French companies that red flags came up. And I think the group's folks here were aware that if they tried to register using the full name, they wouldn't be allowed to set up shop here. And so they set up these front companies, a training consultancy, and that lets you rent an office space and collect, payments if you wanted to, and so on. And and as it turned out, I think MHA named a couple of these companies that were set up, right? And I think our colleagues went down to look at the premises, but no one had been around, and so on.
Okay.
So my suspicion is I think the members are lying low for the meantime, and while investigations are ongoing. I think why the authorities initiated or accelerated action was sort of because, there might have been public health concerns, especially if there were members who had traveled to Daegu and back.
Of course.
Yep.
Well, I want to just delve into a little bit of the writing and the preparing of this story. So why were these two former members, like I said, Linda and Shanice, not their real names, why were they willing to come out and share their story with you? I
think they got in touch, and I think they, having read over the past week and a bit about the developments in South Korea, about the coronavirus and how this church secretive practices were at the center of it, I think they felt that they had been, deceived and, almost manipulated into attending its activities and when they were in. So I think that was why they wanted to sort of warn others, especially young adults. If you notice, the group actually, it claims to be a church and it claims to have its own unique interpretation of Christianity, but it was anything but mainstream. And so they wanted to warn others, against sort of being deceived.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Zakir, for coming onto the show. That was Zakir Hussain, news editor at The Straits Times, and you can read his story at straitstimes.com. Dylan, over to you.
Now, in Parliament today, a new inter-ministry committee has been set up to combat online scams. This comes after an increasing number of police reports were made last year.
The Anti-Scam Centre was set up in 2019 to mitigate the losses of victims. We will do more. Given the different domains that online scams can impact, we will be setting up an inter-ministry committee to execute a comprehensive strategy to combat scams. This will include A. Deterring potential perpetrators, B. Limiting the ability of perpetrators to conduct operations in Singapore, C. Mitigating the losses incurred by victims, and D. Ensuring that the public is vigilant and wary of scams.
The Singapore Armed Forces will be restructured to deal with cyber terrorism and maritime threats. Now, an integrated cyber force led by the new Chief C4I, or Command Control Communications, Computers and Intelligence, will report directly to the Chief of Defence Force. Besides this new cyber command, the Singapore Navy will also enhance its capabilities to deal with maritime threats such as the recent spike in sea robberies and intrusions. Now, all national servicemen across all ranks will see their monthly allowance increased by $70 to $120 from March. NS allowances will last increase in December 2015. This means an NSF recruit will get $630 a month, up from the current $560. The retirement age for Home Affairs uniform officers such as the police will be gradually increased to 58 by 2030, up from 55 currently. This was mentioned by Minister K. Shanmugam during his speech today.
That will allow us to tap on the experience of our more mature officers. It will enhance career transition efforts, and it will help them secure a meaningful second career after retiring from the home team.
And those are your top stories. Keep up to date with news in Singapore and around the world at straitstimes.com. I'm Olivia Quay with Dylan Ang. See you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.